March 1943. The small village of Saint-Rémy in occupied France sat beneath a grey sky, its cobblestone streets empty except for the occasional patrol. In a cramped attic room above a bakery, 17-year-old Marie Dubois carefully folded another letter, her hands trembling slightly as she sealed it with wax. She had no idea that her elaborate fiction, a romance that existed only in her imagination, would soon expose the movements of every German patrol unit in the region. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as a desperate attempt to protect her family would transform into one of the most ingenious intelligence operations of the French resistance, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun, but a pen and a vulnerable heart. Marie had always been good with words. Before the occupation, she had dreamed of becoming a writer, filling notebooks with stories about faraway places and impossible romances. Now those same skills served a different purpose. Her father, a baker, had been arrested 3 weeks earlier for allegedly hiding resistance fighters in the cellar. The charge was false, but the local German commander, Hauptmann Klaus Richter, had made it clear that the only way to secure her father's release was through cooperation. Richter was a career officer, 42 years old, who had served in the German armed forces since the early 1930s. He ran the occupation garrison in Saint-Rémy with methodical efficiency, maintaining detailed logs of every patrol, every search, every interaction with the local population. His office was in the old town hall, a stone building that had stood for 300 years and now housed the instruments of occupation. The morning after her father's arrest, Marie had been summoned to Richter's office. She had expected interrogation, threats, perhaps worse. Instead, she found a man who seemed almost bored by the routine of occupation. He sat behind a large wooden desk, papers stacked neatly on either side, a photograph of a woman and 2 children visible in a silver frame. Then he said something that changed everything. "I have read your father's papers," Richter had told her in careful French. "He is not a resistance fighter. He is simply a baker who makes excellent bread. But I have orders, and orders must be followed. However, perhaps we can find an arrangement." Marie had stared at him, her throat tight with fear and confusion. What kind of arrangement, she had managed to ask. Richter leaned back in his chair, studying her with grey eyes that seemed tired rather than cruel. "You are educated," he said. "You write well. I have seen your school essays among your father's belongings. I need someone who can help me with correspondence. Official letters, reports that must be translated into proper French. Do this for me, and your father can return home." It was a trap, Marie had been certain, some elaborate scheme to force her into betrayal. But what choice did she have? She had agreed, and 2 days later, her father was released, thinner and shaken but alive. For the first week, Marie simply translated documents as requested. Richter would hand her German reports that needed to be rendered into French for the local mayor or the regional prefect. The work was tedious but harmless: requisition orders for food supplies, announcements about curfew hours, notifications about labor conscription. She would sit at a small desk in the corner of Richter's office, carefully writing out translations while he worked at his own desk, occasionally answering phone calls or receiving subordinates who came with questions about patrol schedules and security arrangements. That was when Marie began to notice the pattern. Every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, Richter would receive a report from his second-in-command, Oberleutnant Werner Braun. Braun was a younger officer, perhaps 30, with the nervous energy of someone trying to prove himself capable. He would enter the office, salute sharply, and deliver a verbal report about the previous night's activities and the day's planned operations. Patrol 7 returned from the northern road at 02:30 hours, Braun would say. "No incidents reported. Patrol 3 will depart for the eastern checkpoint at 1100 hours. Patrol 9 conducts searches in the village center between 14 and 1600 hours. Marie realized she was hearing the complete operational schedule of the German forces in the region. Every patrol route, every timing, every checkpoint. And Richter, confident that a 17-year-old girl posed no threat, never asked her to leave the room during these briefings. She began to memorize everything. The German garrison in Saint-Rémy consisted of approximately 90 soldiers, organized into 12 patrol units that rotated through various routes and duties. Each patrol had a designation number and followed a specific schedule that repeated every 72 hours. Patrol 1 covered the main road to Lyon, departing each Monday and Thursday at dawn. Patrol 2 monitored the railway line, checking for sabotage every evening at dusk. Patrol 3 handled the eastern farmlands, where resistance activity was suspected but never proven. Marie absorbed it all, her mind working constantly to track the patterns, but she had no way to pass the information to anyone who could use it. The resistance network in Saint-Rémy had been shattered by recent arrests. She knew no one she could trust, no method to make contact without risking immediate capture. The knowledge sat inside her like a weight, valuable but useless. Then, 3 weeks into her work as Richter's translator, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived for Richter from Germany. Marie was translating a supply requisition when he opened the envelope, read the contents and let out a long, heavy sigh. She glanced up to see him staring at the letter with an expression of profound sadness. "My wife," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "She asks when I will come home. How can I tell her I do not know?" Marie said nothing, but Richter continued, his voice distant. "5 years I have been away. My children hardly remember me. My daughter is now 12, my son is 9. They write to me as if I am a stranger." He looked at Marie with those tired grey eyes. "Do you know what that is like? To be separated from everything you love by circumstances you cannot control." Marie thought of her own mother, who had died when she was 13. She thought of her father, still recovering from his ordeal in custody. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I know what it is like to lose the people you love." Something shifted in Richter's demeanor after that conversation. He began to talk to her more, not about military matters, but about life before the conflict. He spoke of his work as a teacher in Hamburg, of his passion for literature and history. He showed her the books he kept in his office, volumes of Goethe and Schiller, but also French authors like Hugo and Dumas. "I did not choose this path," he told her one afternoon. "I was recalled to service. I follow orders because that is what soldiers do. But I dream of returning to my classroom, to teaching young people about the great works of civilization rather than enforcing occupation." Marie found herself in an impossible position. She could not sympathize with a man who represented the regime that had torn apart her country. Yet she could not entirely dismiss his humanity either. He was, she realized, as trapped as she was, caught between duty and desire, following orders he might not believe in because the alternative was unthinkable. And then she had the idea that would change everything. If Richter craved connection, craved the feeling of being understood and valued as something other than an occupying officer, perhaps she could give him that. Not genuinely, but as a construction. A fiction so compelling that it would make him trust her completely. She began to write letters. The first letter was addressed to a fictional German soldier named Thomas Klein, supposedly stationed in another part of France. Marie created an entire identity for this imaginary man, a sensitive soul from Stuttgart who loved poetry and missed his family, who wrote to her about his doubts and fears, who saw her as a kindred spirit in a world gone mad. She left the letter on Richter's desk, as if by accident, while delivering a translation. She watched from the corner of her eye as he picked it up, glanced at it, and then, this was crucial, set it aside without reading it fully. The next day, she left another letter, this one a response from Thomas that she had written to herself. More personal, more intimate, references to walks they had supposedly taken together, conversations about literature and art, expressions of longing, Richter noticed. He did not say anything directly, but Marie could sense his awareness. He began to watch her differently, with a kind of paternal concern mixed with curiosity. On the fourth letter, she made her move. She wrote a passage that she knew Richter would see, deliberately placing it where he could not help but read a few lines. In it, Thomas expressed worry about his patrol duties, about having to search farms where he knew innocent families lived, about the moral weight of following orders that felt wrong. The next morning, Richter asked her directly. "This soldier who writes to you," he said carefully, "he sounds like a thoughtful man. It must be difficult to maintain such a correspondence during these times. Marie had prepared for this moment. She looked down, allowing vulnerability to show in her expression. "He understands things," she said quietly. "He does not judge. He sees me as more than just a French girl in an occupied village." Richter nodded slowly. "That is important," he said. "To be seen as a full person, not just a role. I understand that feeling very well." From that point forward, Marie's fictional correspondence became a fixture of the office. She would write letters to Thomas during slow periods, and Richter would occasionally comment on how absorbed she seemed in her writing. She began to mention details that she knew would resonate with him: Thomas's love of German poetry, his guilt over the occupation, his dreams of returning to civilian life. And then she took the next step. She started incorporating military information into the letters. At first, it was subtle. A casual mention in Thomas's letters about his patrol schedule, how he would be on duty Tuesday and Wednesday, but would have Thursday free, references to checkpoints he would be staffing, complaints about early morning assignments or late-night watches. Marie made sure these letters were visible to Richter. She made sure he could see her responding to Thomas, writing back with her own details about the routines in Saint-Rémy. Nothing that seemed like intelligence gathering, just the natural conversation of two young people trying to find normalcy in abnormal circumstances. Then came the breakthrough. A young woman named Sophie Laurent approached Marie after church one Sunday. Sophie's brother was with the resistance network in the hills north of Saint-Rémy. "He needed information," Sophie whispered. "Routes, schedules, anything that could help avoid patrols." Did Marie have access to such things? Marie's heart had hammered in her chest. She told Sophie to meet her that night behind the old mill, away from any eyes or ears. At the meeting, Marie explained her situation. She had information, detailed operational schedules for every German patrol in the region, but she needed a way to deliver it that would not expose her position in Richter's office. If the resistance acted on intelligence that was too precise, too accurate, Richter would immediately know there was a leak. Sophie listened intently, then smiled. "My brother has contacts across the region," she said. "If you can provide the information, we can coordinate actions in multiple locations simultaneously. It will look like ordinary guerrilla activity, not the result of specific intelligence." They developed a system. Every 3 days, Marie would create a new letter from Thomas, filled with military information, disguised as personal correspondence. Sophie would meet her at predetermined locations to receive copies. The resistance would then plan their activities around the patrol schedules, ambushing supply convoys when Marie knew the routes would be lightly guarded, moving weapons and personnel when patrols were focused elsewhere, conducting sabotage operations during gaps in coverage. The beauty of the scheme was its psychological camouflage. Richter saw Marie's letters as evidence of her isolation and vulnerability, her need for connection with someone who understood her position. He occasionally offered fatherly advice about maintaining hope during difficult times. He never suspected that the romantic correspondence he sympathetically observed was actually an intelligence pipeline that was systematically undermining German operations throughout the region. By May of 1943, Marie's information had contributed to 11 successful resistance operations. A weapons cache was relocated hours before a scheduled German search. A group of Allied pilots who had been shot down and were evading capture were guided through gaps in patrol coverage to safety. Supplies intended for the German garrison were intercepted based on precise knowledge of convoy timing and routes. The German armed forces in Saint-Rémy began to suffer what appeared to be an extraordinary run of bad luck. Patrols arrived at suspected resistance locations to find them abandoned. Checkpoints set up to catch smugglers found empty roads. Security sweeps aimed at catching resistance fighters netted nothing but confused civilians. Oberleutnant Braun became increasingly frustrated during his morning briefings to Richter. "The resistance seems to anticipate our every move," he complained. "It is as if they can predict where we will be and when." Richter, sitting at his desk with Marie working quietly in the corner, would frown and suggest adjustments to the schedules. "Perhaps we need to vary our patterns more," he would say. "Make our movements less predictable." But Marie would hear these new plans during the briefings, write them into Thomas's next letter, and passed them to Sophie within 24 hours. The resistance adapted faster than the German forces could react. In June, Marie made the letters even more elaborate. She created an entire fictional world where Thomas had been reassigned to work directly with patrol coordination, giving him even more detailed access to operational information. She wrote passionate passages about how Thomas would describe his daily work to her, sharing his frustrations about inefficient scheduling and communication problems between units. Richter, reading over her shoulder one afternoon with the permission she carefully granted him, commented on how realistic it all seemed. "This Thomas," he said, "sounds like someone I would have valued as a subordinate. His observations about operational challenges are quite astute." Marie had nearly laughed at the irony. Richter was essentially praising his own briefings, filtered through her fiction, and reflected back at him as the observations of an imaginary soldier. By late summer, Marie had created an entire cast of fictional characters in her correspondence. Thomas now mentioned colleagues: Corporal Friedrich, who complained about night patrol duty; Lieutenant Hans, who was meticulous about checkpoint procedures; Sergeant Otto, who preferred the southern routes because they were less demanding. Each character represented a real patrol unit or operational element that Marie was tracking. The fictional relationships between these characters mirrored actual command structures and operational relationships in the German forces. The resistance began to refer to Marie as the novelist, a testament to the elaborate fiction she maintained. Her intelligence reports, disguised as love letters, became legendary within the network. Commanders in Lyon and Paris received summaries of her information, always carefully attributed to maintain security, and used it to plan larger operations across the region. Then, in September of 1943, disaster nearly struck. A resistance operation went wrong. A team attempting to destroy railway tracks was discovered by a patrol that should not have been there according to Marie's information. 3 resistance fighters were captured, and under interrogation, they revealed that they had been acting on intelligence from within Saint-Rémy. Richter received orders to conduct a thorough investigation. Every civilian who had access to German operations was to be questioned. Every pattern was to be analyzed for possible leaks. Marie knew her time was running out. She could not possibly withstand a serious investigation. Her presence in Richter's office during sensitive briefings would immediately mark her as suspicious. But before Richter could begin the investigation, Marie made a desperate gamble. She wrote a final letter from Thomas, one that Richter would definitely see because she left it openly on her desk. In the letter, Thomas expressed deep concern because he had heard rumors that the German army's mail was being intercepted and read by resistance agents. He wrote about his fear that their correspondence might have been compromised, that someone might be using their letters to gather intelligence. The letter went on to express Thomas's anguish at the thought of putting Marie in danger through their correspondence. He suggested they stop writing for a time until the security situation improved. He declared his love for her, but insisted that her safety was more important than his need for connection. Richter found the letter that afternoon. Marie, working at her desk, heard him pick it up, read it, and let out a soft sound of sympathy. "The poor man," Richter said. "He is trying to protect you. That is the sign of genuine affection." Marie looked up, allowing tears to fill her eyes. "It is not fair," she said, her voice breaking. "The only thing that makes this bearable, and now even that is taken away." Richter set down the letter and came to stand beside her desk. "Marie," he said gently, "I promise you, your correspondence has not been compromised. I myself have seen these letters. They contain nothing but the natural expressions of 2 young people finding comfort in each other. If there is a security leak in this region, it is not through your mailbox." Marie stared at him. "You are certain?" "I am certain," Richter replied. "In fact, I will personally vouch for you when the investigation is conducted. Your letters are innocent. I have read enough of them to know that absolutely." And just like that, Marie was cleared. Richter's testimony, based on his sympathetic observation of her romantic correspondence, protected her from scrutiny. The investigation eventually identified a different source for the leak, a French clerk who worked in the German communications office and had been passing information before being caught and executed. Marie continued her work, but with even greater care. She adjusted her patterns, made the information in Thomas's letters more subtle, more diffuse. She added false information occasionally to throw off any potential analysis. She created story arcs in the correspondence, Thomas being reassigned, then returning, a fictional leave that explained gaps in intelligence, conflicts with superior officers that justified periods of reduced access. The correspondence became so elaborate that Marie sometimes lost track of which details were real and which were invented. She kept a private notebook hidden in the bakery's cellar where she mapped out the entire fictional narrative alongside the actual intelligence framework it concealed. By December of 1943, Marie's intelligence network had contributed to the successful evacuation of 47 Allied airmen, the interception of 23 German supply convoys, and the safe relocation of 12 resistance cells that would have otherwise been captured. The German military leadership in the region was baffled by the seemingly prescient abilities of the local resistance. Richter, for his part, began to rely on Marie for more than just translation. He would discuss operational challenges with her, seeking her perspective on why the resistance seemed so effective. She would carefully suggest ideas that would actually benefit the resistance while appearing to help the German forces, proposing patrol patterns that created predictable gaps, suggesting communication protocols that were easier for the resistance to monitor. "You have a strategic mind," Richter told her one afternoon. "If you had been born in different circumstances, you would have made an excellent staff officer." Marie had smiled and thanked him, all while knowing that she was using that strategic mind to systematically undermine every operation he planned. In January of 1944, Thomas's letters began to mention something new. Whispers of a coming Allied invasion, rumors of massive troop movements in Britain. Marie incorporated this not as intelligence, but as anxiety, having Thomas express fear about what would happen when the invasion came, worry about being overwhelmed by superior forces. She watched Richter's reaction carefully. He read the letters with growing concern, not because they revealed specific intelligence, but because they reflected a growing sense among German soldiers that the tide was turning. "He is afraid," Richter said quietly, after reading one particularly emotional letter from Thomas. "They are all afraid. They can feel what is coming." "Do you feel it too?" Marie asked, taking a risk with the question. Richter looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he admitted. "I feel it. I have felt it for some time now. We are stretched too thin, fighting on too many fronts. The mathematics of industrial production are against us. The numbers do not lie." Marie filed away this conversation and included elements of it in her next report to the resistance. Richter's assessment that German forces were overextended, that they understood their position was deteriorating. This was valuable intelligence about the psychological state of the occupation forces. On June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy began. The news reached Saint-Rémy within hours, and the German garrison went into high alert. Richter's office became a hub of frantic activity as orders came down from regional command. Redeployments were planned, resources were redirected. Through it all, Marie sat at her desk, quietly documenting everything. She no longer needed to hide her note-taking. Richter assumed she was helping him organize the chaos, translating urgent communications and keeping records. In reality, she was capturing every detail of the German response, every unit movement, every weakness revealed by the frantic redeployment. Thomas's letters took on a desperate tone during this period. Marie wrote of his unit being pulled north toward the invasion front, of his fear that he would never see her again, of his certainty that the conflict was entering its final phase. In July, Saint-Rémy was liberated by advancing Allied forces. The German garrison withdrew in reasonably good order, following a plan that Marie had already reported to the resistance days earlier. There was no battle for the village. The resistance had ensured that Allied forces knew exactly when and how the German withdrawal would occur, allowing them to time their arrival perfectly. Richter was among the last to leave. He came to the bakery to say goodbye to Marie, finding her helping her father prepare bread for the arriving Allied soldiers. "You should go," Marie told him. "They will be here within the hour." Richter nodded. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for your assistance these past months. You made a difficult assignment more bearable." Your letters to your soldier friend reminded me that humanity persists even in circumstances like these. Marie felt an unexpected pang of something she could not quite name. Not affection, certainly not sympathy, but perhaps a recognition of shared humanity, despite being on opposite sides of an immense conflict. "I hope you make it home to your family," she said, and meant it. Richter smiled sadly. "And I hope your Thomas makes it home to you. He is a lucky man to have inspired such devotion." He left and Marie watched him go, this man who had never suspected that the romantic correspondence he had so sympathetically observed was actually the instrument of his own military failures. After the liberation, Marie was debriefed by Allied intelligence officers who could hardly believe the extent and accuracy of her reporting. The fictional character of Thomas Klein, they discovered, had provided more consistent and reliable intelligence than most actual agents operating in France. "How did you do it?" one officer asked her. "How did you maintain such an elaborate fiction for over a year without being caught?" Marie thought about it carefully before answering. "I gave them what they wanted to see," she said. A lonely girl finding comfort in a wartime romance. It never occurred to them that the heart could be a disguise for the mind. The intelligence she had gathered was used to write a comprehensive analysis of German patrol patterns and operational procedures in occupied France. The analysis became a training document for intelligence officers, an example of how human psychology could be exploited to create cover for espionage. Marie's notebook, the one she had kept hidden in the bakery cellar, was preserved as a historical document. It showed the complete parallel structure she had maintained. The fictional narrative of Thomas and his colleagues on one side, the actual intelligence framework on the other. It was, historians would later note, one of the most creative examples of tradecraft in the war. After the conflict ended, Marie did become a writer, as she had always dreamed. Her first novel, published in 1948, was about a young woman who creates an imaginary correspondent to survive difficult times. The book never mentioned the war directly, but everyone who read it understood what it was really about: the power of fiction to shape reality, the strength required to maintain a double identity, the strange intimacy that can develop even between enemies. Richter survived the conflict and did return to teaching in Hamburg. In 1952, Marie received a letter from him. He had read her novel, he wrote, and recognized elements of their time together. He had since learned, through historical accounts being published, about the intelligence operation that had been conducted from within his own office. "I should be angry," he wrote. "I should feel betrayed. Instead, I feel a strange kind of admiration. You were a soldier fighting with the weapons you had available. You never lied to me about who you were, only about the soldier who wrote you letters. And in an odd way, I think you did see me as a person, not just an enemy. That is more than many people manage during wartime." Marie never responded to the letter. Some things, she felt, were better left in the past. But she kept it, filed away with her notebooks and draft letters, a reminder of the complicated truth that wars are fought not just by nations and armies, but by individual human beings making impossible choices. The village of Saint-Rémy erected a small plaque in 1955, honoring Marie's contribution to the resistance. It mentioned her intelligence work, but did not detail the method she used. That story came out slowly over the years, pieced together from interviews and declassified documents. Today, Marie's story is taught in intelligence training programs as an example of how effective cover can be built from authentic human emotions and behaviors. The fictional romance between Marie and Thomas Klein demonstrated that the most believable lies are the ones that contain elements of truth, the truth of human longing, of the desire for connection, of the need to be seen as more than just a role in a larger conflict. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.